The Indus River gave its name to India, and along its banks are the sites of some of the earliest urban settlements on Earth. Though the subcontinent was the birthplace of many of the world's great religions, excavations of these cities have uncovered no evidence of any organised religious practices. Within the last 2,000 years, a culture of religious tolerance developed amongst the many faiths of these lands. Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism all originated here, and the Mughal conquerors built their Islamic mosques alongside Hindu temples. In 1582, when Europe was in the grip of almost continuous religious conflict between Christian sects, the Mughal Emperor Akbar the Great exhorted his philosophers to seek a way for all religions in his empire to coexist. To some extent, this is still a society that is tolerant of religious difference, but the balance has shifted, and today Hinduism is the majority faith in India, and consequently, the third most popular religion in the world.
Hinduism has been evolving for thousands of years, and its current dominant status has been achieved by its willingness to change, its genius for adapting to the changing circumstances of its followers, absorbing the customs and beliefs of different faiths as it grew.
The temples constructed to nurture this faith are some of the greatest architectural treasures in India. And in this last program of the series, we are in the southern Indian state of Tamil Nadu. This is where Hindu temple culture reached its zenith, and there is no better place to understand the story of these remarkable buildings. India is a country of over 1 billion people, and the Hindu majority understand and interpret their existence in terms of their relationship with the divine. Their faith, a complex synthesis of many ancient beliefs, is inseparable from their everyday lives. The sacred and the profane are inextricably entwined. Even some of its most ardent followers will tell you that Hinduism is not a religion, but a cultural phenomenon. The word Hindu is also derived from the mighty Indus River. And for those who have not grown up in its homeland, this most Indian of faiths can be difficult to understand. The myriad Hindu deities inhabit another dimension, but its followers believe that the world in which we live is illusory, and the goal is to break through this illusion and discover reality beyond. The locus for this quest is the temple. The Hindu temple is where the divide between illusion and reality is at its most porous, where the opportunity to achieve darshan, a vision of the divine, is most possible. Every community in India, great or small, will have its own temple, the centre of its social and spiritual life. And these places have fostered the greatest flowering of Hindu artistic expression.
I've been studying these buildings for over 20 years. They're remarkable works of art in their own right, but they're also the cradle of creativity for sculpture, poetry, music and dance, the very heart of a vibrant culture that's beating as strongly as ever. My fascination began as a student when I set out across this landscape on a scooter and discovered a way of life that stretches back over millennia.
Descending from the arid Deccan Plateau, the flat and forested landscape of southern India is very different to the north. This is a land apart, ethnically and culturally distinct, and with a separate history. Even the Mughal conquest did not reach this far south. In the 6th century, a dynasty known as the Pallavas came to power in southern India. Their empire thrived on trade, and the town of Mahabalipuram on the Coromandel coast was their principal port. Fishing is now the mainstay of this coast, part of the modern state of Tamil Nadu. But in a golden age in the 7th and 8th centuries, the Pallava kings turned Mahabalipuram into an artisan laboratory for the craft of stone carving, and it now has World Heritage status. Beached like a petrified ship to the south of the town is one of the earliest freestanding stone temples in India, the Shore Temple.
When this temple was built, many of the elements of temple design had already become standardized, but the origins of this architectural form are not buildings at all.
A few hundred yards inland from the Shore Temple is a shrine from the start of the Pallava period that helps us appreciate why these buildings evolved in the way they did. Like many caves and natural rock formations in India, an opening in this granite overhang has been enlarged and shaped over many generations to provide a site to worship local gods.
The earliest temples were built at potent natural sites where it was believed that these unfathomable beings were most likely to reveal themselves.
These shrines could have been as simple as a clearing in the forest, a source of spring water, or as in this case, a cave. What they all shared was a setting where the natural energy of the earth seemed to manifest itself. This remarkable rock architecture is 1400 years old, and the men who carved it were trying to harness the spirit of the stone from which it is formed. These beams mimic timber cross members, and the whole structure was formed in imitation of wooden temples. The columns appear to be holding the roof up, but it is all made from the living rock. Inside is a small, dark, womb-like chamber, where very little natural light penetrates, and this is regarded as the most sacred part of the temple, the sanctum. On the back wall is a carved panel which tells us that this temple is dedicated to Shiva, shown here with his consort Parvati. On the side wall is a panel showing Vishnu, reclining on the primordial waters. Shiva and Vishnu are two of the principal gods of Hinduism.
Here in this early temple, you see both Vishnu and Shiva coexist, but that won't last.
As Hinduism evolved, here in southern India, Shiva became the more popular deity, while in the north, Vishnu is more common, but both are aspects of the divine. At the time these cave temples were made, by far the most popular faith in India was Buddhism, and the people who worshipped here would have been most surprised to discover that they would one day be regarded as part of an organized religion called Hinduism. The earliest animist practices saw the spirit of the earth and its power manifest in all natural things. Despite its selection of recognizable Hindu deities, this isolated rural shrine in a forest clearing has a powerful sense of mystery. When it was first venerated by the local villagers, it would have had little to do with Shiva. The many hundreds of clay horses gently decaying in the undergrowth tell us that this shrine is dedicated to Ayanar, a deity who protects rural villages and is almost exclusively found in Tamil Nadu. He rides around on horseback, fighting the demons of the forest. The inspiration for this holy place was spiritual rather than religious. A potent nexus for the essence of the forest. A similar sense of the power of natural forces is evident by the shore at Mahabalipuram. Set back from the sea, we find the next phase in the development of the Pallava stone carvers. A row of rocky outcrops and boulders allowed them to work on a relatively modest scale to try out some of their ideas for rock-cut temples.
These are the rathas, a word which means chariot, and they're the first freestanding rock-cut temples in Indian architecture, and they are completely without precedent.
The rathas are not strictly temples because they were never finished, but they functioned as an aesthetic playground for the Pallava kings. They are extremely architecturally diverse for the 7th century, each one trying out different shapes and layouts and with a rich variety of ornamentation. The smaller outcrops were used to create animals and other mythical figures.
However, there were occasionally botched jobs. Imagine the sorry group of stonecutters who stood around this magnificent carving of Shiva's bull Nandi and watched as a natural fault in the granite caused his rear end to fall off.
But this challenge seemed to be one the Pallava craftsmen relished, and it was in stone that Hindu architecture came to life. At the four corners of this last ratha are figures of Shiva and other gods with scripts in ancient Tamil carved in the masonry above. One is thought to be the king Narasimhavarman I, with an inscription that proclaims his patronage of the site. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Skills developed in the Pallava times have not been lost. In the back alleys of the town today there are hundreds of stone artisans chiseling away in ramshackle street studios, meticulously turning stone into devotional art. The granite that these stonemasons are carving is not found locally. It has to be transported from a quarry 50 kilometres away. But what Mahabalipuram does have, which makes it the undisputed centre of stone carving along this coast, are the craftsmen.
Artists are available here.
Right, so the skill is here.
Yes, that's right.
Do you take the craftsmen to see the ancient temples?
Yes, then we are showing the photographs also. And we are teaching the people how to follow the tradition. Then on the base of the training only then.
The apprenticeship to become a master mason here takes a minimum of 7 years, and in that time every aspect of the process is covered. The workshop even manufacture their own chisels.
Do you see the production of sculpture as an act of devotion?
Yes. Normally, even the stone itself is as a soul. We are touching the soul, we are making the statue.
There is no doubt that the modern carvers have developed their own style. Though they are depicting the same deities, these figures are subtly different from those that we see from 1,000 years ago. There is some mechanisation to relieve the more laborious work, and there are other welcome innovations like hot chai at 3 o'clock. As well as doing a brisk business with passing tourists, the masons working in these yards are kept busy, supplying sculptures to temples all over the world, from Neasden to Nairobi. These stone images would be used in temple shrines, like this small rock-cut building nearby, which takes its inspiration straight from the rathas on the beach. It consists of nothing more than the shrine chamber itself, and a narrow veranda for worshippers.
So this temple has actually been consecrated with an image of Ganesh, and people are clearly leaving prayers and lighting lamps.
Ganesh is Shiva's son, and as ever, there are many versions of his story. The most common tells how Parvati gave birth to a boy while Shiva was on his travels. She went to wash herself and told her son not to admit any man to the house while she did so. Shiva returned and found his way barred by the youth, and in a rage beheaded him. Parvati emerged and revealed the identity of the boy, and a remorseful Shiva brought him back to life, replacing his head with one from a passing elephant. Family fidelity was restored. As any Bollywood film goer will tell you, the Indians love a good yarn. This passion for storytelling is extravagantly indulged at Mahabalipuram's greatest treasure, the low-relief carving known as the Descent of the Ganges. Carved in the early 7th century at the same time as the Rathas, this exuberant panorama is packed with life, spilling down the faces of two monolithic boulders some 43 feet high.
As far as storytelling in stone goes, this is pretty hard to beat, but it's also an example of inspired planning. The sculptors have adapted a natural cleft in the rock to represent the story of the Ganges, whose life-giving waters are so central to the Hindu worldview.
So what are we being shown? Well, the simple version is that the mythical sage Bhagiratha is entreating Shiva to bring the celestial river Ganga to earth. The gods are rushing to the banks to see this miracle, and all the creatures of creation are watching in admiration, including a family of life-sized elephants. It's full of beautifully observed details and comic illusion. Bhagiratha is shown as a sadhu, a holy man, balanced on one leg, but his holiness is somewhat undermined when we see his pose imitated lower down by a cat.
For Hindus, Ganga is personified as a goddess, flowing down from a faraway source high in the Himalayas to water the plains of India. So powerful was her force that Shiva had to break her descent by extending his matted locks, lest she flood the earth, and thus you see the union of male and female forces.
A more complex alternative is that this is an episode from the early Hindu epic tale, the Mahabharata. The holy man is in fact a character called Arjuna, standing on one leg as a penance, in the hope that Shiva will grant him an invincible weapon to destroy his enemies. We don't know which of these two narratives the original artists had in mind, but both resist complete explanation with equal stubbornness. What we are seeing here is an early example of the taste for complex ornament, and this seething mass of deities will eventually become a staple of temple decoration.
Lots of people find Hinduism confusing because of the multiplicity of gods and goddesses, but amid this profusion of deities lies a very simple idea. These characters are all different aspects of one ultimate energy which is beyond name and form. So at its core, Hinduism is actually a monotheistic religion.
For the Pandavas, their greatest moment was the construction of the Shore Temple, a landmark not just for their own progress as Masons, but for the development of the nascent Hindu faith. The Shore Temple marked a significant move towards building on a monumental scale. Whether it was an architectural masterpiece or a simple carving on the back wall of a cave, at the heart of any Hindu devotional building is the shrine, a small sacred space where the devotee experiences darshan, the presence of the divine. As these buildings grew in size, it became common to mark the presence of the central shrine with an elaborately carved tower known as the Vimana, which stands as a marker very visibly proclaiming the temple's location to the faithful. Though this building is a freestanding structure, the way the rock is carved harks back to the Rathas. It is not made of regular stone blocks and mortar, but huge sections of precisely shaped granite.
This temple, which has stood here for 12 centuries, is only held together by the weight of its component parts and a complex system of load distribution.
Time has proved this to be perfectly sufficient to withstand the elements. The 2004 tsunami hit this coast with considerable force, but the building survived. The shore temple shows just how far early Hinduism had come by the 8th century, but there was plenty of opposition for the hearts and minds of the people. What was needed was a big marketing push to advertise its advantages, and that is exactly what it got. It's too simplistic to suggest that Hinduism was just a more attractive religious experience than the Buddhist or Jain alternatives, but both these faiths demanded rather a lot from their adherents. This is a sculpture of the Buddha during the 6 years he spent fasting. After this extensive road test, even he acknowledged that this was not the way to attain enlightenment.
But here in Tamil Nadu, there was a group of characters who found just the right sales pitch for Hinduism, a set of holy men called the Nayanmars, or the Hounds of Shiva.
Between the 7th and the 9th centuries, this pantheon of 63 mystics and philosophers, also known as the Tamil Saints, promoted a new kind of devotional Hinduism.
They are renowned because they travelled through the Tamil country singing the praises of the god Shiva in the most extravagant and wonderful way. Their poetry today is still, even in translation, is intoxicating. Yes, it's quite wonderful.
And why are they so keen on Shiva?
Well, it's obvious, isn't it? I mean, he is about power. He is both the creator of life and of the cosmos, and he's also the destroyer. And he's totally different in that respect from Vishnu, who sits in the middle, who's the ideal husband, the ideal king, the lord of society, of settled society. Shiva is very often dynamic and at the extremes.
So he was very seductive.
Yes, if you're interested in an exciting life. Yes.
Life was getting exciting for these Hindu revolutionaries. Their teaching was beginning to win a sizable following.
While Europe was groping through the Dark Ages, in India, Hinduism was moving slowly towards the light.
The hymns written by the saints were central to their success. The Nayanmars are said to have sung the Buddhists out of India, and their songs are still sung in the temples today.
The Nayanmars offered a path to salvation that was open to all. Their great attraction that they shared with Islamic Sufism, which was developing around the same time in northern India, was that a personal expression of devotion was a way to become one with the divine.
Many of the rituals associated with Hinduism today, such as the chanting of the names of the deities and pilgrimages to holy sites, were established by the Nayanmars. But in a practical sense, the goal was also to give Hinduism a popular face. The fantastic array of gods meant that everyone could find their own personal deity and set them to work on behalf of their soul.
What they were striving for was a structure for Hinduism, a way to formalise and codify its disparate rituals, to give it order and therefore authority. And to do that, they needed to write it all down.
Hinduism is not a religion of the book. There is no central source of authority, like the Bible or the Quran, to refer to promulgate the absolute word of God. But that doesn't mean there is any shortage of scripture. The whole canon of Hindu philosophy thrives on debate and spiritual inquiry, much of it delightfully contradictory. If you tried to collect it all together, it would fill a myriad libraries. What was added to this at the time of the Tamil Saints was a far more rigorous set of instructions for the devotee, the agamas.
So this is the final form which we have now, the
The agamas are a set of rules to guide the Hindu devotee. They are incredibly wide-ranging, offering advice on temple construction, on the intricacies of the guru-disciple relationship, on meditations on the nature of Lord Shiva, covering every moment of life, from waking to sleeping.
How he should get up from bed, what he should see, what he should think immediately waking up. From that onwards, till he goes to sleep in the night, midnight, all are codified.
This is the library of the French Institute in Puducherry, where 8,000 bundles of palm leaves have been collected, on which the agamas are inscribed.
And how did they do the writing?
Writing, this is one of the most widely used stylus, sharp-edged iron one. It is held in this fashion.
The palm leaf is scratched by the stylus, and then soot is rubbed onto the surface where it bonds with the sap to leave the finely intricate script. Once state-of-the-art technology, the palm leaf manuscripts were painstakingly recopied every 100 years or so to preserve them. But these copies lead a pampered life, stored in an air-conditioned library, and are regularly painted with lemongrass oil to maintain their subtleness and prevent them being eaten by insects.
Tritiyam Bandhanakramam.
The agamas originated in Tamil Nadu and are written in the ancient Tamil language.
Gata
All 8,000 bundles are now being translated before being photographed and digitized, allowing them to be accessed online. The agamas now gave Hinduism a formal structure that is still a keystone of its practice today. In the wake of this change, we begin to see a significant decline in the Buddhist presence in India.
Buddhism, a faith that had once counted itself as the main religion of India and had been successfully exported to China and across Asia, was now destined to disappear from the land where the Buddha had sat under a tree and attained enlightenment. Why this happened is still a matter of fierce debate. The two religions share many central beliefs, and there is some evidence to suggest that Hinduism simply absorbed many adherents of Buddhism by borrowing their ideas. There may have been some persecution, but there was no major conflict, just an increasingly rapid acceptance of the newly invigorated Hindu teaching. Towards the end of the 9th century, a new dynasty established itself in Tamil Nadu. From their origins on the banks of the Kaveri River, the Cholas quickly gained control of peninsular India and spread their influence into Sri Lanka, ultimately becoming the principal military, economic and cultural force in southern Asia. Once established, they turned their attention to the glorification of their new capital, here at Tanjavur, and they certainly left an incredible legacy. The Chola dynasty produced many notable kings, but perhaps the greatest came to the throne at the end of the 11th century. Raja Chola was a rare combination of both empire builder and patron of the arts, but perhaps his greatest legacy is as a builder, and this was his greatest triumph.
This building was completed in 1010, so has not long since celebrated its 1000th birthday. It was started and completed in one continuous push during the lifetime of Raja Chola, and in the immediate aftermath of the Hindu revolution sparked by the Tamil saints. It's 300 years since the Shore Temple at Mahabalipuram was built, and we can clearly see that a great leap forward has occurred. Its sheer size speaks of a building created for a dominant faith. Inscriptions in ancient Tamil tell us that Rajaraja Chola was instructed to build the temple in a dream, but the real inspiration was surely the architecture of power. It is of course dedicated to Shiva, and the message is clear. Rajaraja and Lord Shiva were two sides of the same coin. As a work of art, it established a distinctive Chola style, both in design and ornamentation, which was to last for the next few centuries. The multifaceted columns and their projecting square capitals were widely copied, but it was the height of the central tower over the shrine, the Vimana, and its monumental gateways, the gopurams, that were its greatest innovations.
The temple gopurams that Rajaraja built were more opulently embellished and on a far grander scale than had been attempted before. In the flat Tamil landscape, these mighty stone doorways came to dominate the view, announcing the presence of this colossal building. So we're entering through the great stone gopuram of Rajaraja.
Dr. Nagaswamy was formerly the director of the Archaeological Survey of India, and took a particular interest in this building. He probably knows more about its construction than Rajaraja Chola ever did, starting with the very first marker peg the builders set in the earth.
When the sun rises, the shadow will be thrown on the western side, that will be marked. And then on the same day, when the sun sets, they draw the central line, exact central line.
This central axis is the basis of the sacred geometry of the temple. Along this line, the location of the main shrine is determined, and this point, directly below the finial on the central tower, the Vimana, becomes the focus from which the entire complex is plotted.
Now in this plan, you see the central Vimana or the main tower
And the inner sanctum.
Now this is exactly in the center of this outer square.
Sure.
This outer square, which we call the back square, is the original cosmic diagram on which it is laid out.
Yeah.
And then that is doubled.
In many ways, Rajaraja Chola was only doing what had been done before, on a monumental scale. The Vimana is only a few feet shorter than Westminster Abbey. But Rajaraja couldn't just do as he pleased here. He was bound by the rules laid down in the Agamas.
They prescribe that you must first prepare the measuring scale.
So what are the measurements of this based on?
The central finger of the builder, Rajaraja Chola.
I imagine it would take quite a few multiples of Rajaraja's middle finger to reach 216 feet to the top of the Vimana here. But he seemed to have had his finger in every aspect of the temple.
This inscription, which says that the King Rajaraja covered the entire tall Vimana at the back with gold. Tower is called Mahameru. Mahameru means the golden mountain beyond Himalaya, which is a mythical mountain.
Sure.
But that was the place where Shiva used to reside.
Yeah, Shiva's mountain abode.
Yeah.
The inscriptions are extraordinarily comprehensive. Just like the Tamil saints who preceded him, Rajaraja was codifying Hinduism, recording the operational practices of his temple.
Every detail. Who is responsible? How much money was given? For what purpose? And then he says at the end that so long as the sun and the moon last, this gift must be protected.
The rules of temple architecture, which are laid down in the Agamas, were followed by Rajaraja Chola when he came to build this temple. But though he was a man of refined aesthetic taste, he was also an able administrator.
Rajaraja created a multi-layered system of government in which the temple was the central authority and the largest employer. with a vast permanent workforce that included priests and ceremonial officers, financiers, maintenance teams, cooks and kitchen staff, but also the most talented youngsters in the arts of poetry, singing and dance. The temple dancers were apprenticed at an early age, and usually for life. The disciplines of classical Hindu dance came from a 2,000-year-old work called the Natya Shastra, and remarkably, it is still being taught today.
Classical dance is a comprehensive study. It is not only the movement of your body, it is total union of all your senses, your body, mind and soul.
One obvious way in which these skills are still evident in modern Indian culture is in the dance routines of Bollywood films. But the complex vocabulary of gestures that these students are learning has been refined over centuries.
It kind of triggers your subtle emotions. In today's other art forms, which is more popular, like commercial art forms, there is no place for subtle emotions. It is all very blatant and very strong. But here, you can see how subtle can be strong. We also need to have that divine connection for people who really believe in it. There are dancers who really believe in, connecting it with the temple. It is very important that it goes beyond caste, creed, nationality, because ultimately it's a language. Yeah, it has come out of the temples, but now it's a totally different scenario. We have festivals organized by the temple authorities where dancers are invited to dance in the temple precincts.
Classical dance is one aspect of temple culture that has found its way into mainstream Indian life and is now invited back inside the temples to participate again in the sacred rituals that originally inspired it.
Beyond its function as a community centre, workplace and school, the primary purpose of a temple is spiritual. And right at its centre is the shrine of the main deity where the devotees come to receive darshan.
This is the route of circumambulation, and it leads us to a powerful image at the heart of Hinduism. We move from profane to sacred space as we approach the central shrine. In this most potent place is kept a phallic symbol, the lingam. The lingam is a smooth column of stone rising out of a circular base that represents the female.
Here we have one in one of the side shrines, which shows the yoni, the female yoni, with Shiva rising as progenitor of the universe from the centre of it.
The lingam represents the presence of Shiva, and to gaze on it is to receive darshan. The room where it is kept is the direct descendant of the recess in the back of the cave that we saw back in Mahabalipuram.
The surprise is that inside there is no embellishment, no grand design, no incredible ornamentation that you see on the exterior of the temple. Just a simple, potent space where the devotee can be one with the divine. Unlike a church, there's no congregation, there's no liturgy. Every temple has its own tradition and everyone is on their own journey.
The Nayana's concept of supreme personal devotion to a god like Shiva meant that you travelled together on your journey through life. But even with Shiva's guidance, where your journey led you was largely up to you. Reincarnation is a central tenet of all the religions that originate in India, and your behaviour during this life will determine how you return in the next.
The intensely personal nature of Hinduism made it very attractive to people of different needs and aspirations. Each chose their own journey and selected the gods from whom they would seek guidance. The object of the journey was to accrue good karma, behavioural brownie points, and to ultimately obtain release from the endless cycle of birth and rebirth.
In pursuit of that supreme challenge, we can see how the form of this remarkable building evolved, channeling worshippers towards the central shrine and the presence of the divine. It's a long way from a forest clearing. By the time it was finished, the basic precepts of Hindu worship were set in stone. But though this building was the peak of Chola artistic achievement, their lasting legacy was not in granite at all.
More than 1,000 years ago, it was discovered that the sand in this particular bend of the Kaveri River had a purity that was supremely good for bronze casting.
It was in bronze that the Chola craftsmen established their artistic heritage, creating beautiful works of sculpture that are still being replicated today. Just like the stonemasons in Mahabalipuram, the main subjects for the bronze sculptures made here are likenesses of the Hindu deities. Today the furnace is powered by this venerable old motor, which began its working life under the bonnet of an ambassador taxi, and in most other respects, nothing has changed here for 1,000 years. The figures are made using an ingenious process called lost wax casting, and the first step is to make a wax version of the sculpture. The material in this heated basin is actually a mixture of beeswax and resin, and part of the skill is the constant warming of the wax while it is being worked. The team all have their own specialities, and they develop extraordinary speed and dexterity. In fact, they make it look so simple, I thought I'd have a go.
Okay, let's go. Mine doesn't look like yours. Then you get the fun. Have to have a little bit of both.
Now this is where the all-important mud comes in. The wax sculpture is encased in a mould made from Kaveri River sand, making sure all the details are retained. This is then allowed to dry out.
Then for every mold we make 2 holes. Then after we put in the slanting portion and we cover with the iron strings to become more strong. Then after we heat the mold, the wax should be lost here. So we get the negative hollow inside the mold.
In the furnace area, the moulds are gently cooking on a fire on one side of the room to drain away the wax, while the bronze is being brought up to temperature in the fire pit. Trusting only in the protection of their cotton lungis, the team begin to pour the metal.
There's something incredibly captivating and primordial about this fire, and also the way all these men work together.
Even after the moulds have cooled and are broken open, there's still plenty to do cleaning up the figure's rough edges, but the end result makes it all worthwhile.
This is magnificent, look at this.
And this is also made out of 1 mold. Yeah, this is about 800 kilos.
Like the stone Shiva Lingam in the temple shrine, this is another manifestation of Shiva. Known as the Nataraja, this is an avatar, originally a Hindu word for an incarnation of the deity when they descend to the earth. In this form, Shiva is the cosmic dancer creating the universe while stamping down the dwarf of ignorance.
This is the cycle of time.
Exactly, we call universe.
Yeah.
And this is the fire circle we call also, and he's dancing in the fire circle.
How do you achieve this kind of balance?
In the wax itself we make the measurement. Even though the circle is also come under, everything is made
So
of
you create
single
the
mold.
whole figure in wax?
In wax, exactly.
So part of preserving the tradition is not just preserving the product, but also the process.
Exactly.
These bronze deities are made in every size, from the largest temple figures to the smallest domestic gods for a bedroom shrine. The material allows for a fluidity of movement, softer expressions and gestures, communicating messages of benevolence and forgiveness. And the more beautiful and refined the bronze god is, the more likely the spirit of the real deity is to inhabit the sculpture.
The other great advantage to a sculpture cast in bronze as opposed to stone was that it was portable.
For centuries, the stone gods in the temple shrines were a fixed and immovable presence, drawing the faithful to darshan. But the advent of portable bronze figures meant that the deities could leave their shrines.
This is Madurai, one of the great temple cities of South India, and the figure on the palanquin is once again Shiva. He's been taken on a nightly excursion around the temple, and this ceremony shows how devotional practices changed in the period after the Tamil saints.
The bronze statue of Shiva is hidden from our view behind the curtains, but for the priests carrying him, he is very real. He's been taken to spend the night with his consort, Parvati, known here by the name of one of her avatars, Meenakshi, and the tryst will take place in her shrine. These golden footprints represent Shiva descending from his palanquin to enter Meenakshi's shrine. The local legend tells us that Shiva and Meenakshi were married in Madurai in a ceremony performed by Vishnu, and after a long and happy life together as rulers of the town, they assumed divine form and she became the deity of this temple. There may seem to be an element of mystical pantomime here, an elaborate mask in which the divine couple make out behind closed doors. But their mortal followers are being shown an activity that they can relate to their own lives. The veil of illusion becomes translucent.
The marriage of Shiva and Meenakshi is consummated anew every night, and at dawn Shiva slips away back to his own shrine.
Madurai is in the deep south of Tamil Nadu. It's over 2,500 years old and was mentioned by Greek travellers when the paint was still wet on the Parthenon. The sprawling complex of halls and courtyards that make up its labyrinthine temple cover an area the size of 25 football pitches, and it has no less than 14 gopurams.
The gopura came into its own at the great temple of Madurai, and it was here that it became a defining feature of temple architecture of the south. The vimana underwent a corresponding shrinking process and was now barely visible from the ground level.
The other very visible feature is the colourful wordy sculpture on the towers. These plaster figures proclaim to the faithful just what an army of deities are working away on behalf of their soul. But the lurid choice of colours is a fairly recent addition. The custodians of the temple, the priestly class who manage the building and its day-to-day affairs, are Brahmins, the top rung of the Indian caste system. At the opposite end of the spectrum are untouchables, not considered worthy to enter the temple shrine. But they too need an opportunity to experience darshan.
The city of Madurai developed according to a division of labour, and the model on which it's based is said to be like the unfurling petals of a lotus flower, and at its centre is the temple where the Brahmins officiate. In the surrounding streets, the warrior caste, or the Kshatriya, are found, and the next layer is for merchants or landowners, known as the Vaishya. In the outlying districts live the Sudra, commoners or peasants, and on the fringes of the city are those without a caste.
There are 160 Brahmin priests working at this temple, and it is through their good offices that access to the main shrine is regulated. In theory, they minister to all without fear or favour.
Rich, poor, able, disabled, there is no discrimination among the people to worship those who are coming as devotees.
Things get slightly uncomfortable when it comes to equal access to all areas.
How about people who want to go to the inner sanctum? Can anybody go?
Not anybody, because we are the medium for them.
So you're saying there's a system here?
The system, the principle, all cannot easily go in.
For the untouchables who are not permitted to enter the shrine, and for those who simply feel they can navigate life without the guiding hand of a Brahmin priest, there are alternatives. In a corner of the main temple courtyard, genuinely accessible to all, there is a small shrine to Ganesh, the remover of obstacles, which is extremely busy. These worshippers are allowed to touch the deity, to make their own offerings, and to conduct their own personal rituals. But by doing so, they remain very much part of Hindu practices. Familiar religious images are now emerging from the temples and becoming part of mainstream Indian life. A process that began with the advent of cheap colour printing in the late 19th century. The painter, Raja Ravi Varma, became hugely popular by portraying the deities in a contemporary Western style using oil paint. The performance artist Pushpa Mala has recreated his familiar image of the goddess Lakshmi, casting herself as the deity.
Lakshmi, of course, is the goddess of wealth.
Yes.
But Ravi Varma also created this kind of fair-skinned, aristocratic, ideal Indian woman.
Pushpa Mala has also made work based on a series of photographs taken by British ethnographers in the 19th century that sought to categorise the races of India. These images, being regarded as scientific, are not concerned to disguise the darker skin of their subjects.
In fact, the Andamanese Islander picture comes from a very famous study, and they were doing it in all the colonies. And that was in a sense to, control and understand. So that was to kind of really, get a grasp on the world, which was rapidly sort of expanding.
In fact, the term Hindu only came into widespread use during the British Raj, and these religious and ethnic classifications certainly contributed to the rigidity of the Indian caste system. But once these religious stratifications had been formulated, they became a welcome badge for those they labelled. The temple is still the focus for the religious life of Hindu communities, but the younger generation are growing up in a country where their government now wears this religious badge, and religion is more present in everyday culture than ever.
The intensely expressive sculptures that adorn the temple's operas have now appeared in a new guise. Hindu legends are retold in comic book form, and these graphic novels have become immensely popular.
But for a group of young comic book enthusiasts working in a small apartment, these homegrown efforts retelling the familiar stories of Shiva need a bit of updating. Here's their take on the marriage of Shiva and Meenakshi that inspired the ninth ceremony in Madurai. But the scene has now become a mashup of Gotham City and Middle-earth.
I used to read comics, Superman, Batman. I love the graphics in those comics. Then I read a few comics from Indian publishing houses. Stories were good, but the graphics were a little bit obsolete, basically. I used to see Marvel and I used to see the Amachadakada, I used to see the difference. So I said, why not bring these three together, where I have graphics which are universal, and bring in stories which touch our Hindu legends, and bring in the art of narration from Tolkien, and make graphic novels with these three elements.
Although the style of the graphics and the narration are new, for a true Hindu there is very little room for innovation when it comes to the stories.
It doesn't make any sense to deviate, because if the story is there, existed, a lot of people, especially the young ones, or the youth of today, or the Y generation, whatever you may call it, in our country and abroad, don't know much about the story. And the story itself is so interesting. Why do you want to deviate and rock the boat?
As keen as these guys are on sticking to the authentic stories, they have some interesting ideas about Hinduism.
Hindu was never a religion, I believe. This is my personal view. It is a culture. It was a way of living. All of the answers are there in the past. Children from all ages look at the graphic novel and get attracted. Wow, this is such appealing art. I love it. It's so awesome. It's so cool. Okay, then he starts to read, and in that whole process, he understands the story. That's where we come in.
However adroit Hinduism is at adapting itself to the modern world, Hindu philosophy is still difficult to reconcile with Western notions of religious experience. One of the most fundamental disconnects between Eastern and Western thought is represented by Shiva Nataraja and his ring of fire.
Time is cyclical, and all opposites are reconciled in Shiva.
Today, in many fields, India is leading global technological progress. So how does it reconcile scientific advances with ancient myths and legends? Victorian Christianity was severely tested by the theories of scientists like Charles Darwin, and many evangelical Christians still cannot accept the scientific truth of evolution. Hinduism, it seems, has no such issues. Outside the CERN Particle Research Centre in Geneva, Shiva Nataraja, donated by the Indian government, celebrates the involvement of many Indian tech companies in the project. Whether you call it the Large Hadron Collider or Shiva Nataraja, the fact that the origins of the universe lie in a ring of cosmic energy is just confirmation of something Hindus already knew.
What took science so long to catch up?
Does being a Hindu allow a certain freedom of inquiry?
It does, because I can be a Hindu without having to subscribe to a particular god, to a particular book, or to a particular religious practice, which means that I can be completely independent. I can have my own view of the world. I can have my own view of the universe, and I can accommodate different views from different systems and synthesize them in my mind.
For a Hindu, the Black Water, the Indus River or the Indian Ocean mark the boundaries of their homeland. In the days before mass travel, to cross the Black Water and leave India was to cease to be a Hindu, and the rise of Hindu nationalism has reinforced the idea that to be Indian is to be Hindu, and vice versa. But Hindu nationalism is directly at odds with its inclusive tradition, and as India emerges as a major economic force at the forefront of globalization, the role of Hinduism in its society is becoming incendiary.
Total chaos here, and this is the festival of Kartikeya Deepam, and since we're in the Tamil hot southern India, we have yet another festival which celebrates the multifaceted Shiva.
The central story tells how in a moment of celestial competitiveness, Shiva appeared to Vishnu and Brahma as an endless flame of light, and challenged them to find his head and his feet. To cut a long story short, and it is a long story, they fail, and Shiva remains supreme. Like so many other elements of Hinduism, this festival offers the devotee a bewildering array of choices. The basic tale has become freighted with other cargo, competing traditions that obscure the central meaning with excess baggage. In one tradition, the oil lamps ward off evil forces and bring prosperity and joy. In another, the relationship of brothers and sisters is remembered, and siblings exchange gifts. Yet another tale is the alignment of 6 stars at this point in the year, said to represent the 6 faces of Murugan, the Hindu god of war. The complexity that results from this amalgamation of myth and celebration makes it impossible to give a simple answer to the question, What is this festival for?
Perhaps there is no answer, and perhaps there doesn't need to be one. It means something different to each person, that everyone can enjoy it together. And in this simple fact lies the secret to Hinduism's success.
The temples are as busy as they have ever been, and as their traditions spill out into mainstream Indian life once more, their devotees are still seeking answers to questions that are eternal. The many different religions that have vied for the souls of the faithful over the centuries have left a rich legacy in these lands. The haunting relics of the Buddhist culture are now just ruins, but their beautiful devotional art reminds us of their remarkable achievements. The great mosques and mausoleums of the Mughal conquests are architectural masterpieces, venerated around the world, and the skill of their painters and their musical heritage are as cherished today as they have always been. 5,000 years ago, when the first great urban settlements grew up on the banks of the Indus River, the citizens had to devise ways of living together in some of the world's first cities, and they face similar problems now. But as we know, in the Hindu worldview, time is cyclical, not linear.
The cities of these lands today have had to find new strategies to support vast populations, but they have a genius for coping with immense challenges. And as they strive towards solutions, it's perhaps some comfort to know that they've been here before. In the West, time marches on, but here, what goes around comes around.
The documentary musical tells the story of India herself here on BBC4, from the heart of one of her most deprived areas. We spend a year at Mumbai High next.